necessity is the mother of invention, then intimidation has to be the stepmother. Or at least a first cousin. It's definitely true for me, and I would suspect it is for everybody. But we don't really talk about it that much. Maybe it's because it paints us in a worse light. I mean, there's a certain romance to the idea of necessity spurring on creativity. But for whatever reason, intimidation doesn't strike those same chords. So I'll admit it right now. This piece is designed and built the way that it is simply because I was scared that I didn't have what it takes to do it the other way. Let me back up and explain. Before I got to actually planning out the build, this is the design for this cabinet that I had settled on. As I thought my way through it and all of the techniques that I would need to employ, I altered the design and eventually landed on this. So why? Simply put, I didn't believe that I had the skill and precision necessary to pull it off and produce a finished piece that would be strong enough and come out looking clean. The main thing that I was hung up on were the angled dados and getting everything to line up just right by the time the piece would be assembled. I've done angled dados before and they came out fine, but with this piece there were more, and the integrity of the cabinet was really dependent on them being just right. So, in short, my ideas were more advanced than my abilities. I think that's something that we can all relate to from time to time. What this meant was that the piece was going to require a lot more material, essentially double, or actually more. So in all of the shots that you've seen so far, all I'm doing is roughing out all the extra pieces and getting them prepped so that I could start to put the cabinet together. And that was my entire first day. The first part of the cabinet that needed to come together were the 4 exterior pieces. So the next day I started fine-tuning those. The way that I went about this was kind of similar to the way that I made Bad Larry, the trapezoidal cabinet. Only this piece is a parallelogram instead. So all of the cuts you see me making are with the blade set to 37.5 degrees. Half are made with the workpiece vertical, and half with the piece horizontal, or flat on the table, the normal way. In the end, that's what gives the whole thing that 15-degree lean. I'll put a link in the description to a video where I go over the whole process in more detail. Some of the pieces were too long to cut on my table saw, so I used my track saw instead. Again, in these shots, the blade is tilted to 37.5 degrees. Next, I cut the case pieces to their final width, or depth, I guess, depending on how you think of it. And then I cut a couple of grooves in the top and bottom for an eventual sliding door. Then I put the case together so that I could start working on all of the interior pieces that are going to provide the bulk of the structure for this cabinet. By the way, if this is your first time to my channel, welcome. If you like what you're seeing so far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button below. Thanks. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram. That's probably the best place to see all the behind the scenes stuff, extra finished shots of the pieces, and what I'm working on next. After the exterior was dry enough, I moved on to the 2 center partitions. You can't really tell in this shot, or with the naked eye honestly, but because the top piece slightly sags over the span of its length, I cut a little wedge piece to help me place my partitions. So in this shot, I'm taking measurements off of the end and then cutting a piece to length and wedging it in there. Next, I took some measurements to figure out how long of a partition I needed to cut. From here on out, all the pieces are going to be cut with the blade set to 15 degrees. So I pretty much just set it and then left it there until the entire case was constructed. The 2 vertical partitions were probably the most challenging glue up of the build, though they weren't really too bad. Basically, they just required a little pre-planning. I took some of the scrap I had laying around and cut a 15-degree angle on one side. Then I clamped them to the inside of the top and the bottom pieces to help me align and glue the partition in. I'm essentially using these pieces to build a big dado by adding material instead of removing it. And this is the same concept that the entire cabinet is built around. Actually, I guess this is a good time to explain. So at this point, the cabinet looks like this: 4 exterior pieces and 2 vertical partitions. To build everything up and give it some structure, I went about things in this order. By the way, I'll refer to the cabinet as having a component section and a record section for simplicity's sake. So first I put a long bottom piece on the component section. Next I put 2 short vertical pieces. On top of those, I placed a horizontal shelf. Then I put 2 more of the short vertical pieces, and finally an interior top. On the record side, I started off with the interior tops and bottoms between the vertical partitions. And after those were in, I placed vertical pieces between them. You'll also notice that all of these pieces are inset from the vertical partition about 3/4 of an inch. They would have functioned just the same if they were flush, but I like this better as a design element because it kept it from looking too chunky and just kind of gave it some depth. None of this was hard by any means, it was just kind of time consuming. It required a lot of cutting, checking the fit, and then recutting and repeating for every piece. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. That whole measure twice, cut once thing, whoever came up with that saying was building houses, not furniture. With furniture, often you measure 0 times, and then cut as many times as it takes, just nibbling away at something until it fits just right. I held off on initially trimming the exterior pieces with hardwood, because I knew I wanted them to have a slightly more substantial look. A bit more heft to kind of counterbalance the heft of all the stacked layers on the interior. So here I'm cutting pieces for a face frame that will be about 1 inch wide. Next I made miter cuts on the face frame to match the angle of the cabinet. I pretty much just cut one side, lined it up, marked the other side, and then cut it. Then I'd glue it on and work my way around the unit until everything was on. I made sure to place all of the face frame pieces so that the exterior portion was just ever so slightly proud of the plywood. Then I came back and flushed things up with a router. With the cabinet done, I could turn my attention to the base. When I was designing this piece, I actually drew up a bunch of different ideas for the base before I settled on something. What all of the drawing and thinking eventually led me to was this idea. Most of the time that you'd build a piece like this, it would probably be symmetrical, but this one isn't. So initially I was trying symmetrical bases, but it just wasn't meshing. Next I tried asymmetrical bases, but still wasn't really loving anything. So my final solution was to do something that was only mildly asymmetrical, and that kind of matched the movement that the piece looks like it has going. The good thing was, where the base was on the hard side in terms of conception, it was really on the easy side in terms of building. There isn't a whole lot to it. After I had everything milled up and roughed out, I had to glue 2 pieces together in order to yield something that would be wide enough for the 2 legs, I guess we'll call them. Once they were dry, I cut matching angles off the top and bottom to give them the desired lean. For the stretchers, I started by marking out the taper. The pieces were too long to cut on the tapering jig, so I just roughed them out at the bandsaw instead. After I was finished on the bandsaw, I clamped the pieces together and cleaned them up on the joiner. I wasn't going for an exact angle, just a look, so this is accurate enough for this instance. Next I took the stretchers over to the table saw and cleaned up their ends and put a 15-degree bevel on each end. Here I'm marking out what will end up being the length of the piece that goes between the 2 legs, the actual functioning part of the stretcher. Then I took the piece back to the table saw and made my final cuts on the stretcher. Once I was finished with that, I was left with 3 pieces for each stretcher. The aforementioned functioning piece, and 2 little caps that are really just for decoration. I could have used a series of dados and half laps to get the same kind of look and keep it as one piece, but I wanted to try something different and, well, easier. Then I assembled everything using glue, screws, and dominoes. With everything finished, the last thing to do was put together the record player. While I'm doing that, I want to take a second to thank all of my Patreon members. New to the list this month are Paul, John, George, and Ringo. Wait, I read that wrong. Here it is. Paul, George, and Alan. I'm going to go on record and say you guys are the best. Seriously though, I really am grateful for each and every one of you and for all the support and helping enable me to keep this show going. I really do appreciate it, so thank you. If you want to find out how you can support the show too, there's a link to my Patreon page in the description. Check it out. And as always, no pressure. I actually made quite a few mistakes over the course of this build. Luckily though, all of them were easily corrected and didn't really have an impact on the final result. Except one, and it's sort of a big one. In hindsight, I really should have built this thing so that the records leaned the opposite direction. That way when you're thumbing through your collection, you don't have to choose between having the covers face you and having the spines face the outside. Oh well, live and learn, I suppose. Actually, now that I think about it, there's a really easy fix for this that I didn't even consider. Bingo. See, that's the thing with problems. They really are all about perspective. And usually you can find a solution as long as you're willing to change that perspective. So don't be afraid to look at things in a new light. Approach them from different angles and think outside of the parallelogram. See you next time.